Hello, and thank you for clicking on my video. Now this story is another one in my series set in Dinosaur Dell, which is the village entirely inhabited by dinosaurs and other prehistoric reptiles. If you've seen my other videos in this series, you'll know that my name's Alex, and I live here in Tasmania, an island off the coast of Australia, where I act and write. Right? That's confusing. Write and write sound exactly the same, which is kind of important for my next story. This is story number 8, the story of Stig, Stegosaurus, and the scavenger hunt. And stick around at the end of my story to hear a bit more about the real Stegosaurus and why write and write are so confusing. Under the volcano. And not too far from the sulphur springs and the pits of tar. In the middle of a forest of tall tree ferns, you'll find some houses where the footpath turns. This is where I live. You can tell from the roars my neighbours are all dinosaurs. I'm Alex the Alxosaurus. Hello. Now, once upon 70 million years ago... Wait. Which of the stories shall I tell about the dinosaurs living in Dinosaur Dell? The story of Stig Stegosaurus and the scavenger hunt. In a ramshackle house at the end of town, a bit topsy-turvy and tumble-down, a bit too wide and a bit too big, lives the scatterbrained Stegosaurus, Stig. Inside Stig's house, as you can guess, everything is in a mess. Games half played and books half read. In the bread bin tea, in the tea tin, bread. A collage half done and half filled in, and buttons in the biscuit tin. Stig never gives a second thought to anything, although he ought to listen when we tell him to. Always, always think things through. Though he certainly hadn't thought things through that sunny summer morning, because he'd forgotten to set his alarm clock the night before. He'd had a very uncomfortable night's sleep, because he'd put his pyjamas on back to front. And when you remember that a Stegosaurus, like Stig, has a lot of bony plates on his back, putting his pyjamas on back to front was actually quite an achievement in the first place. As well as bony plates on his back, a Stegosaurus has 2 pairs of long spikes on the end of his tail. Stig called it his thagomizer, though that was a word he'd just made up. Stig's mummy had told him a long time ago always to put corks on them at bedtime, but Stig had long ago forgotten to do that and couldn't even remember where the corks had gotten to, so he usually woke up with holes in the bedsheets. Stig thought some cinnamon toast might make his morning a bit better. It was his favourite, though he'd never been able to make it himself quite the way his mummy had made it for him when he was still a little Stegosaurus. Stig was not very good at making breakfast at all. Once he'd spent a whole morning looking at a bottle of orange juice because it said concentrate. But he put the bread on to toast like his mummy had shown him, put the kettle on to boil for tea, and then went out to the back garden. The grass was practically up to the bony plates on his back, because he always forgot to cut it. "Breakfast, Binky!" he called. There was a rustling in the grass, and a huge crocodile with an especially wicked grin appeared. "Oh, there you are, Binky," said Stig, delightedly, and tickled the vicious-looking crocodile under its chin. "Who's a good little lizard?" Stig had been convinced that Binky would be a lizard when he found him as an egg, and was still convinced the crocodile was now just a slightly large lizard, despite everyone else telling him that his pet was actually and most definitely a very large and very bad-tempered crocodile.
Does my good boy want his breakfast?
He took the milk from the fridge and poured it into a saucer. It poured very slowly this morning. That was probably because he'd got muddled the night before, when he'd been making a collage, and left the milk on the table and put the glue in the fridge. He finally put the saucer of glue in front of Binky, who eyeballed it grumpily.
"Oh, Binky, what's that smell?"
said Stig. Something was burning. It was the kettle. He'd forgotten to put any water in it. "Ouch!" he shouted as he picked it up. It was very hot, and a large hole was burnt in the bottom. Meanwhile, Binky had gone in search of the milk and clambered up onto the table.
"Get down, Binky," said Stig. "What is that smell?"
Something was burning again. The toast. It catapulted up into the air, and he just caught it. "Ouch!" he shouted. It was even hotter than the kettle. He dropped it again, and it landed on the floor.
5-second rule,
shouted Stig to himself, and picked it up. The toast was a rather unpleasant shade of charcoal black.
"Oh, it won't matter once I put the cinnamon and sugar on,"
he said to himself, and set about looking for them. Binky, meanwhile, had found the milk, but after sniffing it, decided that maybe the glue might taste better, as the milk had been out all night. Crossly, he ate some of the glitter that Stig had left all over the table from his collage. Stig was happily sprinkling the burnt toast with sugar and cinnamon. His mouth was watering. But just as he was about to take his first bite of the delicious toast, he had a sneezing fit. And the toast landed on the floor, with the cinnamon side down, of course. Binky saw it and leapt off the table delightedly. Of course, he always landed on his feet, like all crocodiles. In fact, Stig had once tried to stop his toast from always landing cinnamon side down by tying it to Binky, who always landed right side up. Whilst Stig was still sneezing, the crocodile gobbled up the toast in one mouthful.
"Oh," said Stig mournfully. "Whatever brought on that attack of the sneezels?"
But it was too late to think any more about that. He was already late.
"Bye-bye, Binky. Be good,"
he said cheerfully, ran out the door, and jumped on his bike, forgetting that he still had his pyjamas on. Backwards. A moment after he had gone, Binky realised that instead of sugar and cinnamon, Stig had gotten muddled and sprinkled the toast with salt and pepper. And he sneezed so hard that the glitter he'd eaten shot out the end of his snout. Stig reached the town square of Dinosaur Dell just in time. You see, on that particular day, Dinosaur Dell was holding a scavenger hunt. You don't know what a scavenger hunt is? Well then, I'd better tell you. A scavenger hunt is a game where you have to get into teams and solve some clues to find some special items. And this scavenger hunt was a particularly special one, because there was going to be a prize of a dinner party for the winner, cooked by no less than Miriam May Azora, one of the best chefs in all Dinosaur Dell. Stig barely had time to jump off his bike, which he left right in the middle of the road. Constable Compsognathus called after him,
"Parking fine."
"Oh, thank you for the compliment," said Stig. The constable shook his head. Miriam May Azora was explaining the rules to everyone. "Now, this scavenger hunt is a little different. I'm going to ask you all to find the ingredients for one of my famous dishes,
The winners will be the team that bring me all the right ingredients for the perfect dinner party. Are you ready?"
"Yes," called everyone.
"But wait a moment. Not everyone is in a team."
"Oh," said Stig, who was all on his own. "I suppose I'll be a team of one. I should have brought Binky with me."
Everyone was secretly relieved that Stig hadn't brought the bad-tempered crocodile with him, and just as relieved not to be on a team with Stig, who, as you know, would never listen when they told him to think things through. And Miriam May Azora read out the first clue.
Now, clue number 1 is all about something no cook like me can do without. To help her make everything sweet and sour, beautiful, fine, white, lovely.
Off rushed the teams at once. Stig stood for a moment and then said to himself,
"Flour! A lovely white flour! Miriam said it was one of the ingredients for the perfect dinner party. Well, if I wanted a chef to cook for me, I'd give her a beautiful white anemone."
And he picked a beautiful white anemone flower and gave it to a bemused Miriam before any of the other teams could return with their bags of flour. Then Miriam read out the second clue.
You've solved number 1, the easiest clue, but listen now for number 2. In the allotments by the stream you must seek, for next to the onions their springs are.
And all the teams and Stig galloped off to the allotments. Stig wasn't really sure what he was looking for and wandered down to the stream to think. In fact, he'd been sitting there thinking when he'd found Binky, so he felt sure he'd find something good there. And whilst he sat there, out of the stream popped Cousteau, the plesiosaurus.
"Oh, Stig,"
she said, surprised.
"I was out for a swim, and look what happened."
And she pointed a flipper at her rubber ring, which had gotten a puncture.
"A leak," said Stig delightedly. "Well, a guest like you would definitely be one of the ingredients for a perfect dinner party, Cousteau. Come on."
And he ran back to Miriam before any of the other teams could arrive with the leeks that they dug up from the allotments. And Miriam read out the third clue.
2 clues you've already heard, so now get ready for the third. With this clue you'll have to tussle. My moule marinière needs more than one.
"The beach!" shouted all the teams together and rushed off. Stig galloped after them, though he wasn't really sure why. He said to himself as he wandered along, looking at the sand. He was so busy looking at the sand, he didn't see Tyrone Tyrannosaurus, who was doing his workout on the beach.
"Muscle!"
cried Stig delightedly.
"Oh," said Tyrone. "A guest like you would definitely be one of the ingredients for a perfect dinner party, Tyrone. Come on."
And he ran back to Miriam before any of the other teams could arrive with the mussels they'd collected on the beach.
"Well,"
said Miriam,
"this is interesting. Do you know, Stegosaurus, your answers weren't quite what I was looking for, but in a way, you're right."
Stig had never been told that before.
Flowers for the chef and the company of guests do make the perfect dinner party. But I think, just to be fair, we should have a tiebreaker question or two. Now these are tough to answer, even for the best chefs. Tell me, what would you hear said if a French dinosaur wanted some bread? And my second question, which I like very much, is how would you order a sausage in Dutch?
Everyone thought very hard, but no one knew the answer.
"Oh, Cousteau, Tyrone, I'm sorry," said Stig. "I thought I'd win us that dinner party, but I can't answer that. French bread? What a question! It's such a pain! And the Dutch sausage? That's the absolute worst.
Goodness me! cried Miriam, impressed. Stig Stegosaurus! I never knew you were a chef yourself. Only a chef would know that pain is the French word for bread, and the word for sausage is worst in Dutch.
And that's really how this story ends, with Stig Stegosaurus and his two new friends sitting happily down to dine at the end of this tale, or do I mean tale, of mine. For though he never thinks things through, Stig's heart is in the right place. It's true. He saved some moule marinière for me too, and even Binky got a crocky bag, which tasted better than the glue. Here's a little bit more about my story. This story is all about Stig, who is a Stegosaurus, of course. Poor Stegosaurus was not treated very fairly for a long time by a lot of writers, because fossils show that he had a small head and an even smaller brain, so many people decided that he must have been a bit dim-witted. In fact, lots of old dinosaur books said that he was so dim-witted that he needed a second brain in his tail. We know now that it wasn't really a second brain at all, but a complicated bundle of nerves instead. And Stegosaurus can't really have been that dim-witted. His type of dinosaur survived for almost 5 million years during the late Jurassic period, and modern humans have only existed for 200,000 years, which is a lot shorter. However, crocodiles, like Stig's pet Binky, have been around for almost 200 million years. They are very tough, and very adaptable too. The largest type of crocodile alive today is the saltwater crocodile, which can grow to a maximum size of 7 meters or 23 feet, almost certainly longer than any of your grown-ups. The saltwater crocodile's largest prehistoric relative was Sarcosuchus, which lived in Africa during the early Cretaceous period, about 112 million years ago. She was almost twice as long as today's saltwater crocodiles, which is really huge. She was so large, she might even have eaten the dinosaurs that lived at the same time as she did. There were lots of other types of crocodilomorphs, which are animals like today's crocodiles that lived at the same time as the dinosaurs, including the huge Dinosuchus, whose name means terrible crocodile, Dacosaurus, who had flippers and lived in the ocean, the tiny Gracilizuchus, who lived in the Triassic period 235 million years ago, ran around on 2 legs and ate insects, and the 8-foot-long armoured Armadillozuchus. Did you notice how, in that last sentence, 8, A-T-E, and 8, E-I-G-H-T, sounded the same, but are spelled differently? The proper word for those sorts of words is homophones, and there are quite a lot of them in English, and in other languages too. It's confusing the homophones flower, F-L-O-W-E-R, and flour, F-L-O-U-R, and leek, L-E-E-K, and leak, L-E-A-K, and muscle, M-U-S-S-E-L, and muscle, M-U-S-C-L-E, that lets Stig win the scavenger hunt. And of course, the Dutch word for sausage, worst, W-O-R-S-T, sounds almost exactly like when we say something is as bad as it can be, and that it's the worst. There are lots of others. For instance, Miriam May Azora might say, "I need to knead this dough," or, "For my soup, I like to use all of the thyme,
all of the time.
Or,
For my dessert, I need 2 pairs of pears too.
can you think of any more sets of words that sound the same but are spelled differently and mean different things? Well, of course, if you're very good, you might come up with whole phrases that sound the same as others, as Miriam's dinner party table might have 4 candles and fork handles on it. And I know that when it's time for dessert, I scream for ice cream. But now I'm getting almost as confused as Stig.
Well, thank you for joining me for a story from Dinosaur Dell. I hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed writing it and telling it. Now, one day I'd obviously like to turn all of my Dinosaur Dell stories into storybooks that anyone can read at home, perhaps using some of the character drawings and photos of Tasmania that you saw on the screen while I was reading the story. I'd love to hear from you, so if you enjoyed the story, or you'd just like to say hello, or even better, tell me who your favourite dinosaur is, please let me know in the comments below, or do visit my website www.alexscottfairley.com, and hopefully I'll see you next time for another story from Dinosaur Dell. Bye for now.